Hi there, this is Rob Acker once again from Ultimate Academy and Smith Bilingual English School. I'm doing my second part of the video series all about cultural nuances. Today's topic is about culture shock, and so forgive me, my face is all red and stuff because I just finished a run, but my mind is just exploding with all kinds of ideas and things like that. So I figured now is as good a time as any to kind of make a video about that. So for those of you who don't know, culture shock basically describes a situation where you enter a completely different environment and culture. And for many people, it can be somewhat of a shock. And so hence we call it culture shock. The shock usually it's unique depending on the individual and person, but some general aspects can be described about this phenomenon. The first thing is that psychologically speaking, your brain is obsessed with making comparisons between the things that you've known and become accustomed to and the things that are different from what you're accustomed to. And so, usually, the culture shock can be anywhere from almost non existent or very mild, all the way to extreme, or sometimes in certain cases, extremely debilitating. So, in those cases, it's usually a product of many things, such as your personality, your perspective on life, whether or not you've mentally prepared for the trip, whether you are the kind of open-minded person in terms of how you look at things or whether you're closed-minded. Obviously, other things such as the reason that you're going to that place. Are you just going there on vacation to relax, or are you going there because you're trying to have a completely different cultural experience? Obviously, in the case of the former, some things can kind of blindside you and hit you, without much warning. Whereas in the latter case, many instances such as this, you're more prepared because you kind of know what you're getting into. So, in particular, I'm going to be looking at China, kind of my own personal experiences about it, and also some other aspects of culture shock that are maybe less well known. So, for many foreigners, particularly in the United States, coming to China is maybe one of the biggest culture shocks that you can experience, especially if you're not prepared for it. Obviously, one of those huge differences is that in America, particularly, we pride ourselves on multiculturalism and we pride ourselves on having a lot of ethnic diversity. Obviously, if you go to another country, usually outside of the United States, you get caught up on kind of how non-diverse, not saying that other countries aren't diverse, there's certainly diversity in many other countries, but particularly when you come to Asia, there are very few non-Asian people there compared to the rest of what we would consider kind of the dominant or majority ethnicity. And so in the case of China, obviously, it's predominantly Asian. Even within China, the Han ethnic group within the 50 plus minority groups within China is by far the biggest. Accounts for more than 90% of the population. And when you're talking about 1.5 billion people approximately, it's a little less than that, but 1.4, pretty close. Uh, that's a lot of people that are predominantly Chinese. In certain cities, especially the bigger main cities such as Guangzhou or Beijing or Shanghai or to a certain extent Hong Kong or other places that have been more or less westernized to a certain degree, it's not as much of a shock. But one of the things you do notice is, wow, there's so many Asian people and there's almost no white people, or black people, or people of Latin ancestry, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Things that you're used to seeing in the United States that you don't really see as much here in China. So one of the things that you notice, is that right away. Another thing you may notice is kind of certain perceptions that are brought on by stereotypes. You allow, in certain cases, to populate your mind with the idea that no, it really is true. All Asians, for example, are short, or all Asians are this, or all Asians are that. As you spend more time there, you start to realize that those conceptions are false. Can they be true to a general extent? Yes. But are they always true? Certainly not. I think it's important to recognize that, sitting there and saying all white people are this, or all black people are that, or all Asian people are this, it really has a lot of limitations, especially when you're talking about literally hundreds of millions of people. It just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. So when you come to China, other things that you may notice, the smells, the sights are different. A big thing you notice is that you kind of get the unique experience of being able to look at writing that you can't read. And that for some of us can be very frustrating because you're used to being able to look at a sign and be able to tell what the sign says and be able to get the information. Obviously, unless you've uh, gone ahead and become somewhat practiced at Chinese, it's going to be a barrier, and it can be annoying or frustrating at first trying to look at signs and not being able to even figure out how you would even begin to pronounce that word, much less what it means. So that can be a little disturbing for some people because you're used to being able in your home country to look at signs and be able to read them. But obviously, that's not going to be the case when you go to a foreign country. When my brother and myself went to Germany, for example, yes, there were certain letters that we didn't recognize, but on the whole, we could at least sound out certain words. Even if we weren't correct, we were at least somewhat in the ballpark. But when you go to China as a Western English speaker, yeah, good luck, unless they've got the pinyin, in which case, hopefully if you study that, you know some of the differences. And that's something else we can go into at a later time. Um, for me personally, when I came to Beijing in 2011 as an exchange student, I was very well prepared for that in terms of psychologically readying myself. It takes about a day, sometimes about 20 hours, 20 to 30 hours, depending on, how your plane route has been prepared or taken care of. In some cases, you can get even less time than that. But back in the day, 100 years ago, you take a boat and it would take 3 months. So you had a lot more time to kind of digest and psychologically prepare yourself. Nowadays, you're there in a day, and it's like, wow, this morning you woke up in America, and then today you've arrived in China, and oh my God, it can be a bit of a shock at times. Other things that happen is psychologically you start to be able to, after you spend about a week or 2 weeks, your brain starts to kind of hit a switch where rather than making the comparisons of all the negative things like, oh my God, look at the pollution, look at the traffic, Chinese people don't know how to drive, all these kinds of things that bubble to the surface of your mind immediately, they start to kind of accept it. Honking all the time, for example, staring at you, stuff like that, they start to not bother you as much, and you start to be able to embrace some of the ways that it's a bit better. For example, everybody's not rushing around everywhere all the time. People kind of take their time getting to places, which is nice, and being able to have a shoshi, a little nap in the middle of the day, almost like a siesta, would be kind of the Latino equivalent and Latin American and South American countries. That's kind of stuff is really nice. I honestly really like it. But some other things to be aware of is, obviously the food. Sometimes your digestive system takes a while to get adjusted to it. Some people complain that the food in China is too oily, and certainly it depends on the region, but definitely Beijing is known for its oily, salty cuisine. But even in Sichuan, there, they used a lot of oil with the cooking, which I still love the cooking and stuff. But if you have a problem with that, it's maybe better to try to prepare meals at home. Some other things too is for women, it can be a real big culture shock using what we kind of have dubbed the squatty potties. And so these ones, there's not a toilet seat really, it's kind of a hole, and you have to kind of squat to use the bathroom. For my wife and other people, especially women, this was a big problem for them. My wife luckily got used to it and kind of got her way through it. Another thing is you usually have to bring your own toilet paper for the bathroom, so that's something to be aware of as well. And yeah, there's so many things I could go into details about, but basically prepare yourself, do your homework, do your research, make sure that you're prepared, mentally for the endeavor. And the best thing to do is really just, you know, embrace it, hop into the culture and really be like, okay, I'm going to be open-minded and I'm going to embrace this and check out what it has to offer for me, because more than likely you're not going to spend the rest of your life here. You're going to come here for a while, a certain set period of time, and you're going to go back. So, get the most out of it that you can. One thing I will say though, is that be careful of reverse culture shock. And this is something that we don't talk about a whole lot, but that's where you become accustomed to this foreign culture. And then once you go back to your regular culture, you actually experience like a degree of reverse culture shock where your own culture suddenly seems foreign and strange and weird. And in certain cases, it can actually seem like quite a psychological letdown. And it does happen to a number of us. I remember when I came back to America for the first time, it sucked. It was terrible. I was like, God, everybody's so greedy. I get off the plane, I'm like, Jesus Christ, these Americans are so fat. Like, where'd all the Asian people go? Like, what's going on with all of this? Like, Jesus, they're all like greedy. They eat way too much meat. Look at how big the plates are. You start making these crazy comparisons. And the reverse culture shock is pretty real, but it fades within a few weeks, and in certain cases it won't bother you at all. But just some things to be aware of. I'm going to cut this video short now, but I hope that's useful to you guys, and yeah, hope to see you on the next session. Take care.